Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mary Eleanor Power, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications with Dalhousie University's College of Continuing Education. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Look Yonder, Local Government Trends. Today's webinar is a great introduction into our Executive Certificate in Local Government, which begins in February, and I'd like to introduce you to its instructor and today's webinar host, Gordon McIntosh. Dr. Gordon McIntosh, CLGM, has 40 years of management, educator, and consultancy experience with local government throughout Canada and overseas. Gordon has conducted over 1,300 training sessions involving more than 140,000 elected, appointed officials and staff. And over to you, Gordon, to get us started. Thank you. Oh, you seem to be muted there, Gordon.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Looks like we've got people all across the country. So hi, Mary Jane. Good to see you on from New Brunswick, and good friend Diane Kalan-Sukra, who's on board as well. And I look forward to hearing from everybody. This participatory session, for anybody who knows me, it's a work in progress. I've curated, or every time I travel, I take pictures, and I want to hear what people are bragging about and what people are talking about. And so these are all, I think 98% of photographs that I've taken to highlight different things that are happening across the country in local, regional, and Indigenous government. So with that in mind, it's a participatory session. If you've got ideas, just use your chat. If I've missed something, which, I mean, there's so much ground to cover, I'm sure I have. But also, if you've got something to brag about, easy for me to note it. And of course, if you're, as we're doing this, say, hey, Gord, I've got a photo that you could use. I'll put my email at the end. I'd love to brag about things that you're doing. So we're going to take it's an abridged version. We're going to take a quick jaunt across 8 trends. Why? Well, there's 2 different types of change facing any organization, but particularly local government. Of course, there's what we call paradigm shifts, right? Slow moving changes that we need to be aware of. But there's also, things that happen like COVID, like 9/11. I was in New Zealand about a year and a half ago, and of course, overnight, things changed for them with the Christchurch massacre. So could be a fire, could be a flood. So there are things that are slow moving paradigm shifts, and then there are things that are just so rapid they change things overnight. So why is it important perhaps to augment what we're doing, scanning? Well, for example, Mary Jane, you'll be heading to elections, I think next May. Nova Scotia just had elections, Saskatchewan just had elections, and for all of us doing any kind of strategic planning, strategic thinking, often we do scanning. When we use strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We might use a framework, around sustainable communities like economy, social pillars. I add infrastructure to that. And so I get it. My observation, though, and you can tell me if this is for you, is that people don't know what they don't know. In other words, 4,000 local governments in the country, and many do only see their only community. They may not be aware of things that are happening. So I thought it would be good to augment scanning exercises with some pictorial kind of prompts, if you will, to get people thinking, get their juices going, get them thinking outside the box, get them thinking outside perhaps what they heard last week or the election process. The other reason, of course, to look at bigger picture in our case right now is there are, as significant as COVID is, there are other significant things that will endure facing our communities that we need to think about. But the other is, and again, you may see this, but we can be easily distracted if we don't see kind of the big picture and really digest the most significant things that are facing our government, our elected officials, our administration. It's easy to chase the squirrels, to get distracted. And I hear that a lot right now as people are trying to deal with things that people bring up. So we're going to try and offer then real time based on traveling the country back and forth from Tuktoyaktuk to Fino, all the way over to Corner Brook and everything in between. Offer some pictorial kind of insights to some of the big trends. There's about 8. And so we'll begin to kind of look at external trends. Now, before we do this, though, I want to say there are 8 trends. I'm just going to do kind of a quick overview of each one, and then I'm going to stop. How you them? So we're going to do 8 polls. So get ready. It's going to be interactive. But also for you, I've got one for you. We've got another thought, or you're missing something. So let's begin. With external signs, external things that are happening. Well, one, of course, is the environment. And, when I was up in Nunavik, I was profoundly impacted by the fact that the Western Arctic will be one of the most significant places in the world affected by global warming. All their infrastructure is above ground. And it will change facilities, it will change their infrastructure. Of course, I just saw yesterday Vancouver trying to adopt a new climate change. Of course, criticisms that it will cost huge implications, huge costs. But, how do we reduce carbon emissions, get people out of their cars, etc.? Or it could be even more specific to things that are happening in, I was cycling from Montreal to Quebec last year for the CAMA conference, Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators. And I noticed somebody using pesticides and somebody not using pesticides. And you might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, a lot of our urban design now impacts how we design things in the future. And of course, for anybody, I was just in Peace River last week, and lo and behold, the first snowstorm of the year. Many would state that the snow is coming earlier, it's lasting longer. So the impact of global warming, climate change, etc. As well, whether it is protecting habitats for a variety of reasons, wildlife corridors, for example, in the Canmore Banff region, or certainly heightened awareness around even protection of bees or other species that might be particular, or protecting areas that maybe can get overrun very easily. For example, and right now, yesterday we went to a beautiful park, Eastwood Park. I live in near Victoria. Well, it was a kilometer long. The parking lot was full, and it was a kilometer long. The parking along the road where, really there shouldn't be any parking, of everybody getting outside. So that's great, right? Is it the last nice day of the year? Is it getting out because of COVID? Lots of different reasons, but I'm hearing this in Vancouver. All our park areas are overcrowded with lots of congestion. Nevertheless, why are they there? To enjoy the outdoors. And of course, that puts a huge stress on the habitat. So how do we let people enjoy natural habitats and yet protect them? An example, Rocky Mountain House. People come to quad and a snowmobile, and course, leave all their garbage, and, you know, the huge impact that it has on their environment. Well, it's not just the natural environment, it's also the human environment. As people look to have community spirit, you know, what are we doing to kind of attract, you know, be attractive? Often when I talk to people, I say, well, why did you end up where you are today? And they say, well, I came and I visited one time, or I did a little bit of work and I just fell in love with the place. Why? Because of the look, the feel, lots of the amenities, which we'll get to in a bit. But so the beautification of the community. Of course, a concern is food security. You know, and whether we're protecting farmland, production of farmland, or, you know, I was intrigued by up in Nunavik, they built a new arena, and what to do with the old one. So they took the shell off, put lights in it, and now they have glass, and now they have an indoor allotment garden. Well, same principle that we might see in more urban areas, but just given their climate, adapting. Or up in the north, you know, providing subsidies for people to have their own plastic greenhouses. In another community, teaching children how to plant and, you know, investing in future generations around food security. Of course, that goes all the way. I was in one community last week, and they were debating whether to let chickens in the backyard. So these things are not necessarily totally without controversy. Energy. There's two parts to energy that I'm seeing. You know, I was up in Whitehorse where, you know, their facilities, they're putting solar on. They just built a new building, and so that whole energy conservation aspect. Or we could go to Banff, where they have subsidized people to put solar panels on their roof using their real estate to be able to, as a municipality, feed energy back into the grid and their own facilities, Prince George, district heating. But as well, we see others, for example, developing, I guess, revenue opportunities as well, whether it's Nova Scotia, wind turbines around Annapolis Royal, or run-of-the-river projects being done by some municipalities for two purposes. One, to be self-sufficient, generate their own energy, but also to you know, lessen the, you know, take their energy off of fossil fuels, etc. So a couple of so energy. A concern as well, and, you know, we see certain communities are totally dependent on resource extraction. So whether that's mining, forestry, for example, Sparwood, which is really coal-based, they will basically take down a mountain behind Sparwood and just change the whole scene, right? The whole feel. But the impact, and so that's one aspect, but then the other aspect of the impact that it will have with dust, with traffic, and the same with down around Crow's Nest Pass, Fort McMurray, the huge demand that those big vehicles put on the roads that the municipality had to pay. So there's the impact, but there's also, you know, the environmental aspect as well of dependency, I guess, on resource extraction. So these are a couple of different areas. And so we're going to do a quick little poll. So Mary Eleanor is going to do us a little poll just to get your sense. And I'm going to try and figure out where the chat button is to see if anybody's kind of adding stuff, any ideas. So feel free to, one, help us with the poll. Just pick three. What are the three things that come to your mind that are the most significant? And as we go, anytime, if you say, hey, Gord, what about this? We should add that. This is a work in progress, so that's awesome.
I'll just keep it open for a few more seconds here. Great. There's a lot of activity here, Gordon.
That's great. Great. It's a participatory morning. Well, it's morning where I am.
That's true.
I think it's almost morning. Well, Nova Scotia. Well, Mary Jane's probably 12:30-ish, 1 o'clock. She's probably
All
having
right.
lunch. She's probably having lunch.
So we have yeah, we have some good activity here. So I'm
Great.
going to end the poll,
Great. Thanks, Mary Ellen.
and then you can see the results here.
Oh, great. Hey, this is awesome. Uh, Now, my whole point of this morning really is to show how we can expose people to lots of ideas. I find when you just do scanning and you just ask people with a blank sheet of paper, it doesn't prompt them, right? And so, and you, in your planning exercise or just taking a pulse in your community, can get a kind of sense of what the big issues are. And I mean, you nailed it. Climate change is, I mean, it's definitely up there. And resource extraction, you could see that one, right? Because not every community necessarily has that. So thanks, everybody. That's great. And again, just use the chat if you, maybe Mary Eleanor, if you can monitor the chat and see if there's any ideas. Well, let's switch to community wellness. The social aspect of our communities, and of course, with Black Lives Matter and Me Too, we've got a lot more around being a welcoming community, welcoming different cultures. How do we, and in particular areas, I noticed, for example, in Grand Prairie, where I was last week in Peace River. A lot of Filipinos working in the hospitality industry. And one of the observations, because I've been to the Philippines many times, and I was talking to some of them, and they said there's special days for the Filipinos, and it was, I guess, not very well supported that those special days they were allowed to take the day off to celebrate. You know, so there's all kinds of different elements that I guess we call them systemic that we need to address both in the workplace but in our community. So just being a welcoming community. One of the things that increasingly I'm seeing is that when resources, finances get a little bit tight, one of the things that often is kind of in the radar, or I'll call it the block, the cutting block, is support for community groups. And you know, it's ironic because when you think about it, when times are tough, the economy's tough, COVID, etc., that's when people need support services. That's when they need social opportunities. And hey, local government can't provide them all. We have community halls, for example, many of which are in smaller municipalities, facilities, arenas, curling rinks, etc., are run by volunteers. And if they lose their resources, and many of them are suffering right now because they've been closed. And so these facilities, of course, at the end of the day, many of them are owned by the local government. So if they falter, local government ends up getting them back. As well, sort of investing volunteers, right? Investing in leadership capacity. You know, how to recruit volunteers, how to manage volunteers, how to be strategic. So developing programs to enhance their capability, or sponsoring, nurturing the startup of new associations. One of the ones that I see across the country is arts and culture, increasing attention to the fabric, the arts, visual arts, performing arts, culture, cultural diversity, celebration, and you know, supporting groups, and just like we have for recreation, for sports groups, and of course just talking to people and finding out what their needs are, so that we can mobilize community resources. Often these are unfortunately called special interests. Hey, these special interest groups are actually dealing with specific interests. In fact, many times marginalized interests that serve us well in our community. Of course, we also have concerns around accessibility to services, whether that's just knowing where services are, people doing directories, if you need help, here's where you can go. My last count in Western Canada, you can tell me if you're seeing this. For example, I was just in Peace River, but I know Spirit River or Jasper are now running medical clinics. And you'd wonder, how did municipalities get into running medical clinics? Hey, if you don't have medical services, you lose people, in particular our older generation people who may have need of services, or families, right? So you lose people or you don't attract people. And if you don't attract people, you don't have market. And if you don't attract young families, you don't have employees. And hence there's a kind of a circle around. As well, just having access. Well, maybe not everybody has the ability to have a facility. So many municipalities looking at alternate ways to get people to services. So many run a handy darts bus system, which is heavily subsidized. But I'm attracted to the idea that maybe we should go to the private sector, taxi companies, Uber or whatever, and give vouchers out for people who have needed services. And of course, for those in need, whether it's food or shelter, how do we protect the vulnerable, especially as we head to winter? And so these are all things that are on the local government. We could say, well, some of them are provincial responsibilities. Yes. Nevertheless, if there's gaps in these services, it's local government right on the front line. Housing, wow, just another one. I don't know about you, I've been kind of involved in local government for 45 years, and to see these rising social issues just increasing, put a lot of pressure, if you will, on our capacity. But many communities now looking at, what do we need to do around housing? We also often we say it's affordable housing, which is a confusing term. Is it emergency housing? Is it social housing? Is it market housing? Is it employee housing? And these are all very, very different. It's employee housing if you're talking about some resort municipalities or major new developments. For example, the highway construction around Golden, or the Site C in around Port St. John, employee housing. Or is it just market housing, the availability of housing that's a wide range? And we're seeing definitely innovative ideas. But another big target area is, of course, housing for seniors. Senior adults, I think is a better term, older adults who want to downsize and maybe, travel, et cetera. And of course, so there's many areas, whether it's entry-level shelter or different needs. And I appreciate that Truth and Reconciliation, or our community relationship with Indigenous governments, may not be universal in some sense. But I think, Indigenous populations, people are in every community. So therefore, I think all of us need to have this on our radar. What are we doing to be an inclusive community at the broadest level? But as well, it also involves government to government. I was just working with the Trajuxwan out of Dawson City 2 weeks ago. We were chatting, and I was reminded that local government's not an order of government, but First Nations are. And so that understanding of heritage, understanding of jurisdiction, understanding of the issues, jurisdictional issues, land claims, et cetera. I can remember quite a while ago, I was working in Penticton, and Penticton, we're trying to develop, enhance a relationship with the Penticton Indian Band. That's what it was called at that time. And they were talking about, well, how difficult it is to get them to come to the table and chat and consistency, et cetera. And finally, one day, one of the counselors said, maybe the enemy is us. Maybe it's us that doesn't understand the culture And so they went on to do some training and awareness training. So I think it behooves all of us to begin to think of our Indigenous populations, just like many other cultures, but these are the first people in Canada. And second, how do we enrich our relationship with Indigenous government? Opportunities. Well, right now, more so than ever, it seems that we need to be concerned around not so much program opportunities, because many of you will note that many of our formal programs are closed right now. Facilities are closed. They're opening up, but they're limited. But it's more the informal opportunities, finding spaces for youth. So there's one community in Saskatchewan, they were talking about maybe we need to rethink having just spaces where youth can gather, kind of do their own thing, versus thinking they all need to be in programs with scheduled times, etc. The same is true for senior adults. I was in northern Sunrise County in St. Isidore and met these wonderful women who I'm not an expert, loom, right, making linens, etc. And I noted that making the linen almost seemed mechanical for them. It was really them talking to each other, just that social space to be able to do things, just absolutely delightful. Creating spaces, when in Truro, or outdoor skating areas, outdoor park areas. Many communities right now saying, hey, what do we need to do to make sure our parks are open this winter to enable people to get outside? As well as celebrations, right? Just opportunities for people to get together, casual space. Lake Country, for example, outside of Kelowna, between Kelowna and Vernon, just purchased a part of an old railway bed, and being able to provide walking spaces, trails, which is on the huge upswing right now. People just wanting to get out and walk and enjoy the outdoors, but also to celebrate. So we've got another poll when you take a look at these. And again, if you've got any ideas, if you think about them later, pop me an email. But I don't see anything yet. So let's do our poll. Mary Eleanor?
Yes, yeah, I have it open here. And I'm just mindful of our time, Gordon. I wonder if there might be a way that I can creatively send these polls as a follow-up to the email that we will be sending later today, just knowing that there will be some people who will need to sign off at our end time at 1 o'clock. So perhaps we'll end this poll, and then I will see if there is a way to send out the other polls later today so we can still get that feedback on the other trends.
Great. Well, I think that's a cue. Well, I think everybody can see each one of these. If you were facilitating doing this, you can dive in and have great discussion. So I'll speed it up a bit, because it is meant to be a rapid tour. So economic development, we see some themes around we need to be business user-friendly, business-friendly. So how do we take the red tape out of things that we're doing, streamline processes, diversifying the economy, moving from typical maybe resource base, well, even in Banff, how do we diversify, or Jasper, from tourism to maybe a strong agriculture area? So how do we move from our traditional industries to diversify? I'm a believer that local government doesn't do economic development. What we do is we do economic readiness. We make sure that we have the ability to grow, to accommodate growth, to accommodate businesses. And whether that's tourists, for example, a simple thing like being able to find washrooms, access to washrooms, or being able to help employees, perhaps in lower paying jobs, typically hospitality, get to work through some kind of transit, or even housing to accommodate future growth. Support. More and more, of course, we're realizing that people can be entrepreneurs. They don't have to be in a building. So how do we support people in the home-based businesses, typically Wi-Fi? How do we enable people, for example, farmers? I see more and more farmer markets across the country, or arts and culture cooperatives, cooperative spaces that once a person in their home begins to flourish, how can we enable them to move to maybe some communal support services, and just the support that we provide for growing and existing businesses. A big one I see, and you've seen this for those who've been here, downtown revitalization. And often it's about how do we fill storefronts? Well, I think increasingly we're thinking it's about repurposing the downtown, rethinking the downtown as a destination, as a social. All we have to do is look at Europe, where people are out on the streets, the roads are closed. And of course, right now we're talking about patios because of COVID, but perhaps this is an opportunity to rethink the streetscape. A little community, for example, developing little parkettes, developing little skating rink for the winter, to major initiatives to, for example, in Prince George, rethinking the whole public, civic, and private spaces. Many, of course, are concerned about identity. How do we become known? 4,000 local governments in the country. And so are you a welcoming community, whether that's signage for visitors or the look? I know Pam Moody in Yarmouth has just a wonderful campaign to try and beautify the community. But how do we get known as a great place to live, a great place to do business? So we're going to do the polls after. So thanks for that suggestion, Mary Eleanor, but sure would appreciate afterwards that you do provide your input, and we're happy to share those results and any new ideas or photographs that we should be adding in. Let me go back to infrastructure. Infrastructure for growth, where are we heading? How are we thinking about new transportation, automated vehicles, making sure we have water supply? For example, I recall a major initiative in Southern Ontario for greenhouses, until somebody realized greenhouses, which is a food basket in that way, it takes a huge amount of water. And so then all the residents after had brownouts for quite a while. So do we have the capacity for growth, the water systems, et cetera, and thinking about new technologies? Of course, a big concern is our aging infrastructure, and looking at, and I think this is now on the council radar. For a long time, I know it was Public Works and engineers, but now thinking about what's our legacy as we move to the future. Are we putting money aside for replacement, but also are we practicing ways to keep it last longer? Waste. I drove to Tuktoyaktuk on the new highway, and this was the entry point, right? Just there's no place to put garbage; it's just there. So what do we do? What are we doing around landfills, or reducing, the amount that would go in? For many, looking at collection, to encourage people. How do we collect the garbage? How do we move it? Or how do we use it? For example, in Chester, turning waste into energy with good friend Tammy. Transportation, certainly for rural Canada, the loss of Greyhound. So how do we get a village from one, to services in a slightly larger center or major center if you're outside community, to new modes of transportation. And certainly that's great, but a concern now of these scooters, et cetera, and their impact on sidewalks and safety, and certainly high regard attention to cycling, whether it's cycling lanes and cycling safety. One of the things that, particularly for smaller northern rural areas is if we want people here, we need to have internet. Well, we don't have to go far. I mean, even looking at Nova Scotia and Truro, looking at a major cannabis facility, that one of the biggest requirements was to make sure they had high-speed broadband. So many looking at how do we attract a vendor, and of course a vendor needs to have market, so then it causes them to look, what do we need to do to perhaps run a utility or subsidize it. I'm encouraged by, I believe whenever we look at these things, there's a lot of gold in the trenches. Council and management can be thinking about things, but really there's a lot of gold in your staff thinking about, hey, how can we do things differently? For example, Grand Prairie using automated lawn devices, to cut grass, or education programs that reduce things being put in our septic and sewage systems, to this beautiful area in Langford, where it looks beautiful, but it's all artificial grass. So lots of innovative ideas now in future design, etc. So infrastructure, we got a couple more to go. Safety. Absolutely, our attention is now to thinking about floods in many areas, or fires, or man-made disasters, whether they be rail, etc. So, are we prepared? I think for a long time, people just, we got an emergency plan. Now, our councils are saying, we have one. Is it usable? Is it ready? Are we in a readiness state? Rethinking policing. Just looking at our methods, which we now hear towards prevention, crime prevention, to broader safety of cameras in park areas, urban design with lighting, etc. That people feel safe, because this is one of the major detractors of communities when you hear that it's not a safe community. Harm reduction. Sorry, I must have missed the other half. Didn't have a lot of pictures around this one, but just how do we, and it goes from whether it's people at risk, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's drug, alcohol abuse, etc. But how do we help people through programs, safe needle exchanges, etc. We know that I think roughly 70% of fire and rescue is done by volunteers. And in some communities, a big struggle to recruit people, as they need to be working for a living, or two people working. And so many areas are struggling to coordinate efforts among volunteers. And of course, we have the whole idea of community sensitivity, community wellness, community niceties, I guess. Just perhaps I've observed, and maybe you have as well, that people are either very, very kind right now with COVID, or very, very nasty. And so how do we encourage community spirit, good neighbor principles, and just being, and I guess the opposite, we call it anti-bullying, but and I know Diane, you do a lot in this area, but just working with what can we do as a local government to promote spirit. I think also in safety, there's many areas, but in particular, the whole area of our water system, our water integrity, protecting watershed sources, to making sure we have reliable quality water. Looking at the number of areas, particularly in the north, and many in our Indigenous communities, around boil water notices, etc. And again, major factors that, since post-Walkerton. Well, there's internal factors as well. So those are externals that we can see. But also, I think we should encourage council to look inside. Around our capacity. And the two things I see right now, as we see on average 50% turnover on councils, is this dilemma between efficiency and effectiveness. We want to be fast and efficient, but we also want to consult with people, which slows things down. So often I see these two values competing. I see what we call the revenue chase. Why don't we go and find a new grant? 4,000 local governments out in the country, and they're all chasing the rainbow for new money that nobody else has found, or pursuing new commercial enterprises, and or even sponsorship. Up in Comox, or even in this community, the sponsorship of fire vehicles or an ambulance vehicle. Looking at our customer service, so rethinking that, how do we make sure people feel good about the service that they're paying for, so they support local government, making things user friendly, making things accessible. And I see a lot of communities doing surveys. And what we've got is the dreaded review, right? And we're going to see that more and more, I think, right now around dealing with major shortfalls. Do we need to go in and get back to the core business? When we get back to the core business, which is primarily property-based services, often we can lose the social services that we've already highlighted. And let's face it, people live in a community not because the roads are smooth, but because of the quality of life. We have just a huge amount of effort going towards scorecards. I don't want to diss them. The problem is quite often we can spend more time measuring things than actually doing something about it. But definitely wanting to compare, where were we, where are we, how do we compare to others? But sometimes we just have to go out and ask people. Just do sessions, meet with the business community, just say, how are we doing? It's the richest environment. It's a two-way street. We can educate and we can get informed at the same time. Collaboration, probably one of the top issues in the country for those who want to avoid amalgamation. And we just have to look across the country: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, BI, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba. The forced amalgam, and of course in Alberta we have legislated collaboration, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but nevertheless. How do we collaborate? How do we work with other local governments? How do we work with crown corporations? How do we work with the nonprofit organizations to be able to share resources, share aims, share expertise, etc.? Well, that brings us then to the organization itself. Looking at the culture, if you will, of the workplace, and definitely it's changing, right? If people haven't been in the office, they've been working remotely. I think it was there before, but it's more pronounced now. And again, I know a good friend Diane's working with areas to kind of rethink what are the values that are important in the workplace. How do we honor them? And strengthen our ability. How do we make sure that if council, I'm putting a caution on that, if council has a strategic direction, that staff are actually aligned with that, and that council can have confidence that staff is moving towards the goals, the priorities of council. Why? Because day to day, the vessel's pretty full, and we need to make sure that strategies are actually being implemented as well. Which brings us to accountability. Accountability for performance, yes, but also accountability for behavior, accountability to the values or principles of a psychologically safe workplace. And let's face it, when we've got service capacity, maybe we have staffing reductions, we've got strategic priorities, that's a lot of pressure to put on the workplace. And I find, when there's a lot of pressure, good people do dumb things. And so more attention to kind of thinking about the workplace. We also have the political administrative interface, which of course is another course we do at Dalhousie. Just that sort of whole collaborative face. We used to think of the hourglass, that it's them and us, but in fact, it's a collaborative effort that requires role clarity. It requires staff not to be psychics, try to figure out what's the will of council. So the whole areas of role clarity and alignment of expectations is so important. Well, I think we just lost a couple there. Sorry about that. Governance. Which the last two were, around physical capacity, but also leadership, both political leadership and administrative leadership. Now more than ever, I think it's always been there, the role of council, the role of mayor, the role of administration in looking at solid people-oriented leadership. Let's switch to governance. Obviously, one of the most significant elements of a governing body is to set a direction for the future. And we spend a lot of time doing strategic plans. I get it, but do they have the passion? And I have always a quick story. Hopefully, I could do it in 30 seconds. I'm sure I'm not going to do it justice, but Prince Rupert, they did 3 strategic plans in a row, 3 documents. You know what happened? They sat on a shelf. And then one year they did some deep scanning, kind of like what we're talking about right now. And they said, you know what? We've got the deepest natural port on the west coast of North America. We've got a sleeping giant across the ocean that's bringing products to North America. Why don't we become the most efficient, shortest route and low cost harbor on the west coast of North America? Today, Walmart can get its product in half the time, half the cost from China to Chicago through the port of Prince Rupert. So I don't want to diss the power of strategic vision. Unfortunately, many times it ends up being a wordsmithing exercise. We have, at the end of the day, we have, public confidence. We have what we call the keyboard warriors, right? Social media, the impact of social media has been a profound being able to listen to people who have contrary views, for example, who are rejecting kind of notice. But definitely we're seeing that local government's now on the radar. Is there public confidence in what we do? So what do? It tends to be that we try and communicate more with them, or we try and enhance what we call transparency. Big word. But more and more, what are we actually doing in camera? How much and how often are we making people aware? As well, we have another phenomenon, I think, across the country as local governments really struggle with their capacity, is looking for a new deal. Now, whether that's a new portion of cannabis retail, whether it's the gas tax, money, but more and more, it's perhaps powers. For example, Edmonton and Calgary were able to get a charter. And so we have charters in Vancouver, Winnipeg, I think Halifax, Montreal, or Quebec City. So more and more communities wanting sort of the powers of a charter. Unfortunately, of course, a new government came in and the Edmonton, Calgary charters were rejected. But the idea of seeking new powers to be able to do the things that we need to be doing. So what do we see at the end of the day with all of this? I think we're seeing a decline in civility. So we have across the country efforts to do codes of conduct, a piece of paper, often without a hammer, integrity commissioners being retained, legislated that everybody has to have a code of conduct and sign it, etc. These are things that it's like meeting procedures, or at the end of the day, these are things that hopefully we can talk about them and deal with them before they become a problem. I think they're symptoms of deeper rooted issues. And so we have decision making. I see a lot of local governments really concerned about how long it takes to make decisions, quality of advice coming to staff, and really just sort of the whole process of how decisions are made is very, and so let me end there. One of the things that happens when we do all this is often it's easy to look backwards and think about where we've been. But I wanted to show you a tool how we could expose people to ideas to seek alignment. It's all about alignment, right? It's all about the organization being aligned with the community, and it's all about us being aligned within the organization. And so the idea of perhaps adding to our kit bag some different ways of looking at scanning beyond, say, the typical SWOT analysis or the pillars might help us to seek alignment. Why? Because if we're not aligned, what happens is we spend a lot of energy trying to get aligned instead of dealing with some of these strategic imperatives that are out there facing us. So thanks for the opportunity. I know we kind of raced on the back end. This is a work in progress. So we'd like you to fill the polls. Number one, that'd be awesome. It'd be great if you say, hey, Gord, what about this? What about this? And even the best would be send us a couple of photographs so we can brag about your community in the next version of this. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, and thank you. Thanks very much, Gordon. We really appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. And as Gordon said, we will hopefully be able to send around the polls later today. We'll be sending out an email also with a recording of today's webinar. And as well, we will be sending around a brochure of the Executive Certificate in Local Government that Gordon will be teaching beginning in February. So keep your eyes out for that email. And thank you very much, everyone, again for joining. And thank you, as always, Gordon, for your time.
Thanks,
Take care, everyone.
everybody.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.